Welcome to the Earth Pod presented by TERI, a space where conversations converge on climate, sustainability, and the urgent need for environmental action. I'm your host, Ipshita Mitra, and today we are counting down to COP30 in Belém, Brazil, where the world will take stock of climate ambition and action. As far as the Indian scenario is concerned, our country is committed to reaching the net zero by 2070 and has revised its nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, in August 2022 under the Paris Agreement. But how close are we to meeting these climate milestones? What are the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, especially now when the global spotlight shifts to equity, finance, and international cooperation? To help us navigate through these questions, today we are joined by Mr RR Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow at TERI and one of India's most revered and experienced climate negotiators. Mr. Rashmi has served as India's Principal Negotiator for Climate Change at the UNFCCC and continues to shape important conversations related to climate policies, carbon markets, and of course, sustainable development. A very warm welcome to this episode of the Earth Pod, sir. We are delighted to have you here. At the outset, sir, if we could start with the commitments, especially for India and the climate pathways that India is planning to chart for itself, and the NDCs, the revised NDCs are supposed to be tabled or discussed at the run-up to the COP30. What do you think, or how do you assess India's climate journey so far based on the current policies and trends?
Thank you very much once again for having me here. You know, the NDCs are an expression of a country's efforts towards stabilizing climate. And we have a serious and very urgent problem. Unfortunately, if you look at the impact of all the NDCs taken together, it's not very much.
Right.
That is the real challenge. That despite the Paris Agreement that we signed in 2015, and almost every single country on the planet has now prepared an NDC, which is a contribution to the global efforts. But the UNFCCC itself has assessed that the impact of all the NDCs taken together is not going to be more than 5.3% over the global emissions of 2019 levels by 2030. Whereas the IPCC had recommended that we should be in a position to bring down the global emissions by at least 43%. So compare this 5.3% against 43% over 2019 levels. So we are obvious that we are not making enough and adequate efforts globally. But the story is very different if you come to specific countries. And India is an example. India is a very interesting example of how NDCs can be both ambitious and yet transformative. Now, we are sometimes, from some quarters we hear that we need to raise our ambition further, more substantially. But I would like to tell you that the track record of India in terms of meeting its NDCs commitments is second to none. Now, we had three important quantified goals in our NDC. One was emissions intensity reduction of the GDP, and goal is 45% compared with 2005 level. You will be surprised to know that we have already achieved 32% reduction in 2020, and we have another 10 years to go. So I think we are fully on track. We will be meeting the emissions intensity reduction target fully. The second target is even more interesting, which is about renewable energy capacity for electricity generation. And the target was 50% of the total electricity generation capacity should be from renewables. And you'll we're glad to know that this year the government has announced that we have already met this target.
Yes.
So it's clear that as far as NDC progress on the NDCs is concerned, India is doing extremely well. We can have certain questions around the specific technical details. For example, our renewable energy target is in terms of capacity, not in terms of actual generation. But in terms of actual capacity itself, it needs upfront investment, and we have done that. So it's huge. Almost of the total 420 megawatt of electricity generation capacity that the country has today, half of it is coming from renewables. That capacity is very substantive.
Right.
So we have to put it to good use. That's another story. Similarly, the third target, which is about forestry carbon, creating a carbon sink in the forests, target is 2.5 to 3 billion tons of additional carbon stock. And I think we are on track here. I don't have the full data, but my friends in the forest tell me that we are adding about 40 million tons of carbon stock every 2 years. So it's quite substantive, and compared with 2005 levels, I think we will be able to meet this target by 2030. So as far as India is concerned, we are doing very well on our NDCs, and I think we will be amongst the top G20 countries which would have fulfilled its NDC commitments.
And also you said that India's NDCs is both transformative and ambitious. Going in that line of thought, it is also in the process of rolling out its domestic carbon market. And recently there was an announcement where the government of India notified that the greenhouse gas emissions intensity target rules for 2025, this makes the first legally binding emissions reductions target for India. So how do you think these schemes or these changes will accelerate India's journey towards emission reduction?
Yeah, I think its impact will be very positive. This is again a very important transformative step that the government of India has taken. It was not easy, because setting up a carbon market, a compliance carbon market, involves setting up specific emission reduction targets for
Right.
specific industries. So there was a certain degree of hesitation in the initial stage of planning of our climate policy, where our emissions are rising. I mean, even now our emissions are bound to rise, since we are a developing country and we have to meet our energy needs. Our energy needs are growing. Given this situation where our energy emissions are bound to rise further, placing a cap or a target on the emission reduction of nature itself is a daunting responsibility. But I think the challenge was met when it was decided that we should go ahead, at least in relative terms, just as at the national level, we have an emission reduction target for the country's economy. We have now an emission reduction target in CO2 terms for specific industries. 9 sectors have been notified, and they have been given specific plant-wise targets to be achieved over a period of 3 years now. So each cycle will run in 3 years, and there will be annual targets. So this year, hopefully, the carbon market will be in place, and this will be an important step towards acceleration of low carbon, or you can say new technologies which can help carbon emission reduction in industries like steel, cement, petrochemicals, petroleum, refineries, pharmaceuticals, which are extremely heat intensive and hard to abate sectors. I'm very hopeful that this particular step will set a benchmark for our economic transition in future.
And when you talk about economic transition and when it is about executing the intent or bringing intent to implementation, what role do you see for mobilizing green finance? Because that is what we talk about when we talk about meeting these climate targets. So mobilizing green finance is a challenge. So what are the kinds of reforms or strategies that you foresee for India to undertake in the future?
Yeah, the challenge is twofold here. For the sector of our economy which is dependent on renewable energy,
Right.
The challenge is to bring upfront investment. The variable cost of solar, for example, has fallen compared with coal. It is lower than coal today. And now I think even some people tell me that the variable cost of solar, even including energy storage also is at par or only slightly higher than coal. So it's a very positive development. But the problem with the renewable energy sector is that it needs huge upfront investment. And which means we have to move our resources away from the conventional sector of development towards this sector. So this needs certain encouragement. And we have to make sure that this investment is completely risk-free. So creating a financial ecosystem in which the investment in renewable energy becomes risk-free. For example, whatever energy renewable energy is produced should be supplied into the grid. The grid should be able to buy it, DISCOMs should be able to buy it, and it should be supplied. But given the complexity of our energy pricing system, our energy policies, which are a combination of central policies and state level policies, we have to do this. It's a complex exercise. That's one challenge in generating finance for our NDCs. And the second is even more difficult, which is the hard to abate sectors, which needs not only finance for investment, but also investment in technologies, newer technologies. For example, the industries like steel or cement or pharmaceuticals, which are dependent on heat or alternative fuels, the industries like shipping or aviation, where you need alternative fuels, which are green or low carbon at least, you need investment in producing those fuels. Moving away from the conventional technologies to newer technologies. That itself is a big task. So we need innovation here and a huge investment in producing these fuels. Government has taken some steps. For example, you have National Hydrogen Mission for producing green hydrogen. We have a green shipping initiative for which the TERI itself is a center of excellence appointed by the Ministry of Shipping. And there are many other schemes and encouragements provided by the government under a production linked incentive for electric vehicles, producing solar panels. So there is an ecosystem being created by the government which encourages more greener investments in these areas, and hopefully it will succeed. But this is a difficult area, I must tell you. This is a difficult and complex area because this is not going to happen overnight. It will take time because we are also competing in the global, the global scenario is not very conducive for this at the moment. We are dependent hugely on import of equipment and technology, critical minerals, for example. So all this plays a role in this. So green finance is not just making money available, it's tackling a number of issues in the short run and in the long run.
Issues which are diverse, sector specific, country specific, especially when we try to draw polarities between developed countries and developing nations. A platform like COP30 becomes an opportunity or an avenue for countries to come and discuss their individual histories, stories, and their climate targets. So bringing COP30 here now, how should India position itself when it comes to equity, issues of climate finance, loss and damage, not just to balance its own national interests, but also to see where they are in terms of the global expectations and their own concerns?
You are absolutely right. In the COP, there are many issues which agitate many countries, and there are diverse interests there. India, as a leading developing country, emerging economy, has always played the role of a leader of the global South, and government is quite conscious of its role as a voice of the developing countries. There is a group of like-minded countries in which India is a partner, and that group has been generally taking a very principled position on any decision that is taken in the COP. And equity naturally becomes the most important consideration there. For example, we talked about NDCs and the global efforts, the adequacy of efforts. Now, the reason why we are failing to make an impact despite making good efforts at national level is that there is no equitable framework of allocation of responsibility compared to one's capability and historical responsibility. So based on our own economic capability, we are doing as much as we can, but there are many other players who can do much more than this. But there is no basis or a transparent criteria on by which it can be done. In the run-up to the Paris Agreement, this issue was discussed very deeply and extensively, but we couldn't come to a conclusion. So this equity issue continues to agitate and it will continue to dominate the discussions in the future. Finance, for example, is a result of the emphasis on making finance available to countries is an expression of the equity issue. Countries, after all, have to divert their resources away from their developmental concerns. For example, we have SDGs to beat. We have 17 SDGs.
Right.
And most of them deal with immediate short-term human development issues. We have issues like water scarcity, food security, we have poverty.
Exactly.
So these issues have to be tackled immediately. And at the same time, we have to now divert our resources or at least make additional resources available for the purpose of green transition. So there is a challenge here. How much of domestic resources can you really allocate for this kind of thing? So we need international support. And that's why this emphasis on additional finance from the developed countries or the global system which can be made available. So this will continue to, and India is a very important voice in this area. At the last conference, you saw how India reacted to this issue and the decision about $300 billion was taken. This was highlighted as a case of mistaken opportunity, missed opportunity and betrayal of trust. Be that as it may, the question is that can we really even make this $300 billion really happen and flow? So there is this at Belém, I think this engagement will take place to decide what should be the roadmap for not only mobilizing $300 billion, but $1.3 trillion, which has been the target set by including everyone, all actors, including the private sector, MDBs. So how should this be done will be an important question, and I think our government will remain engaged in that process. Loss and damage is also a sensitive issue. Well, this is an issue where we have to stand with our partners in the developing world, the AOSIS countries, the small island developing countries, which are very concerned about this. But this is an issue which affects all developing countries universally, rather uniformly. India is a very large, vulnerable country to climate change, and therefore loss and damage is as much a concern in India as in any other small country. So, but we will have to treat a very cautious line here because the issue is also of attributing the responsibility for loss and damage. And this question is very relevant now because there is a ruling now by the ICJ, International Court of Justice, which came in about 3 months ago, and it has said that the countries should be held responsible for the climate harm that is caused to anybody, irrespective of one's being up whether one is signatory to Paris Agreement or not. The countries can be held liable. So given this situation, I think it is extremely critical that India develops a very coherent and a very convincing argument about how the loss and damage issue can be projected. And yet our country's interests are defended.
At the cost of sounding a bit cliched, since COP30 is being hosted by Brazil, South-South collaboration will be at the crux of the discourse. That is what my assumption is. So how do you think India can leverage this opportunity in terms of creating or building robust partnerships to push for Global South initiatives, concerns, and objectives?
I think Global South has to remain united if at all it wants its position on certain issues to succeed. Um, the G77 in China, for example, is a very large group, but it's a group consisting of very diverse interests. There are many countries which represent specific negotiating groups. For example, BASIC has been one such group which was able to, you know, mm, you know, bring the Copenhagen Accord on table along with the US, and finally the Paris Agreement itself. So there is a certain degree of utility in the negotiating groups remaining united. But the Global South, again, as since it's a very large group, I think we will have to choose our partners carefully,
Right.
and build partnerships accordingly. I think Africa is a very good partner for India in this effort. Africa, the whole of African continent contributes just about 4% to the global emissions, just like India. India is contributing about 5% today. And then we have common positions with Africa on adaptation, on loss and damage, on equity, on finance. So I think it's good. Brazil, for example, is a leader of the it's a partner in the Global South. But the basic the role that BASIC played in the initial days of the Paris Agreement, that role is over now. I think now it should transform itself into a group that can leverage its position on specific issues. Loss and damage, for example, is one, finance is one, and we need to come up with solutions or suggestions which appeal to everyone. I'm sure the Brazilian presidency is aware of this complexity, and then the Government of India should also accordingly highlight its position on those issues where it can build effective partnerships within the Global South. So it has to be issue based rather than a very large group that can voice its concern on everything.
Right. As part of the closing reflections, you talked about effective partnerships, which brings me to the recent publication, India's 2035 climate targets developed by TERI and we mean Business Coalition. It was a collaboration, and this briefing came out, and you were closely involved with that. So, drawing from that publication, that briefing, if you could tell us or let us know what is that single most opportunity that India should seize by 2035 as far as its own climate action and goals are concerned?
The central message of that publication or that document which we brought out was that in the next decade, we will have to engage the private sector effectively in our efforts. The government is doing a lot, but government alone cannot do everything.
Right.
So it is necessary for us to involve all the stakeholders and more so the private sector. And we have to build effective models of working. Private sector works according to a certain business model because they have to ensure that they are accountable to their shareholders, and at the same time now they are accountable to the environment as well. So we will have to work very closely with them to construct these effective business models so that finance flows in, they get committed to, they become committed to the national targets or national environmental goals, which are normally not present in their normal investment decision framework. So in the next 10 years, we will have to be a little careful, and we have to be proactive about this. Not simply laying out the government budgets or rules and regulations. Regulations and the policies play a very important role. But we have to move beyond this and create a financial ecosystem which encourages the private sector to move into this area. Government has come out with a climate taxonomy, for example, finance taxonomy. This is a good step. RBI has come up with the risk assessment framework for the financial institutions. So these are all movements in that direction. And I'm hopeful that in the next 10 years, this will get greater clarity, greater engagement, and greater acceptance by the private sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. With that, we come to an end of another engaging discussion. At the Earth Pod, we would like to thank Mr RR Rashmi for helping us unpack India's journey as the world moves to COP30 at Belém in Brazil. From carbon markets, green finance to South-South solidarity, the choices India makes today will shape not just its net zero pathway, but also its role and voice as a global climate leader. The Earth Pod will return with more voices, stories, and insights from various experts and researchers at TERI, covering themes on climate change, sustainability, clean energy, circular economy, and so on. Together, we will discuss the science, the policy, the people, and the planet, and how all of it comes together. If you like today's episode, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts because every conversation that we can spark on, it leads us to sustainable development. Until next time, take care, take action.